Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 19 of Seed Speaks. My name is Alex Martin, and I serve as the editor of Seed World magazine. And today I'm absolutely thrilled to be your host. Last week, you got to hear from my coworker, Ashley Robinson, and her experts to talk about some excellent suggestions on how the seed industry can go green and work to be more sustainable. But this week, we are shifting gears just a little bit. Today, we're here to talk about the science behind seed treatments, and particularly how seed treatments can affect sustainability, the environment, and what the future of the products might look like. And with that, I don't want to hold anyone up. So we have two fantastic panelists joining me today. And I'd like to introduce you, Martin Horrocks, who is Director of Seed Treatment North America for BASF, and Carrie Karstens, who's the Global Regulatory Strategy Leader of Corteva AgriScience. And Carrie is also chair of the Seed Treatment and Environment Committee of the American Seed Trade Association. So thank you both for joining me today. And I'd like to give you a couple of minutes just to briefly introduce yourselves and give some insight. So Martin, if you wouldn't mind starting for us, we'd love to hear a little bit more about you.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm Martin Horrocks. I lead our seed treatment business at BASF for North America. So the business unit was formed in late 2018 after we acquired certain assets from Bayer Crop Science. So we now have a pretty robust and vibrant seed treatment business selling a range of products. So I lead that. As you can tell, I'm not from the US originally. I'm from the UK. I've been here for 20 years. So I think I'm allowed to call it my adopted home. 3 children, young children, all born here. So the roots have gone down, but excited to be here today and looking forward to the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Martin. And Carrie, same to you. I just wanted to see if you give us a little insight to yourself too.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Really excited to be here with Martin today and have the chance to talk with folks about seed treatments. Special love of mine. I spent 5 or 6 years of my career at Corteva focused solely on seed treatments and biologicals as part of Corteva's vast seed business with the Pioneer brand, as well as our own entry into the seed treatment market, as well as a provider of seed treatment technology. So really happy to be here today and very honored also, as you mentioned, to be chair of the ASTA Seed Treatment and Environment Committee. A little bit more about me. I live in central Iowa. I have 3 daughters. We live on a small farm. I don't know if I could still call myself a farmer, but I grew up on one and still participate in the operation with my dad and my siblings as well. So really excited to be able to talk about this aspect of agriculture and technology. It's an exciting area of development for sure. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carrie. Well, and with that, I'd like to go ahead and dive into some of our questions. And we're going to start out with a kind of basic question for Carrie. But Carrie, we would love to hear a little bit more of a quick history lesson. So kind of, would you help us learn what are seed treatments and how and why did they come about?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. If you go back in history, and I'm just going to be quoting a little bit from the International Seed Federation. They've got a nice overview of this on their website for those that are curious. But if you look back in human history, it's quite interesting. We've been soaking seeds or treating seeds in some way for millennia, actually. You can go back to the BC era and see evidence of onion sap and cypress extracts and other things that we soaked seeds in as humans. So when we were first growing and kind of doing that agrarian way of living, recognize that there's a need to protect seed. When you put seed in the ground, something else wants to eat it, whether it's a disease, fungal disease, or perhaps an insect pest or even wildlife. And so over history, humans, as we've gone more and more into rather than hunter-gatherer, but growing our own food, recognize the need to protect it. So you can go back to kind of 2000 BC or so and see evidence of humans protecting seeds. And then obviously, if you go into more modern history, you don't have to go back too far, but you can see development of technologies specific for seed treatment. So even in the 1990s, neonics and others, neonicotinoid insecticides and other technologies that were adapted and specific products made just for protecting seed. But really through the course of history, you can definitely see that as you kind of follow agricultural history as well. And the reason why really is that protection of the seed. So recognizing that if you don't have a healthy start to the seed entering the ground, but then also those early stages of development, you won't have a good crop and a good crop yield, either from a production or amount, a volume of production, or the overall health or quality of it. So really, when you look at the foundation of how seed treatments have been developed, it is about protecting the end result, the yield in the end, and the quality of the product, recognizing that most vulnerable state is the seed and the developing seedling. So when you look at the seed treatment products that are on the market now that seed companies use, you're seeing fungicides to protect against certain diseases that will attack the developing seedling or the seed itself. Same thing with insect pests, so insecticides can be part of that. Certainly you have other products, including biologicals, perhaps nematicides. And then another aspect to the seed coating, that treatment itself also includes a colorant and typically a polymer to help both identify that seed has been treated, but also to help with flowability in a planter and coverage and quality of the treatment integrity as well. So just a little interesting kind of background on seed treatments.
No, thank you so much, Carrie. I would not have known that seed treatments go back that far in our agriculture history. It seems like they're kind of more of a new phenomena as chemistry has developed. But thank you so much for that. And Martin, we're going to kind of switch over to you and talk a little bit more about, seed treatments as well. I know you and I've personally got into chat a bit about seed treatments and some of the questions that have been brought up by different media groups and farmer customers as well. But why do you think that seed treatments are an important tool for growers to use? And what are some ways you're doing to kind of convey that, I guess?
Yep. I think it's interesting. If you look at the different range of options farmers have, seed treatments are used on such a widespread basis, predominantly because they're just very, very effective. They do what is needed. And they're so effective because they're very targeted, they're very precise. At a time when the seed, I think as Kerry mentioned, at a time when the seed's really coming under a lot of stress from disease, from pathogens, from insect pests, from different temperature conditions. So the seed really needs all the help it can get to germinate and to emerge and to turn into a crop. And seed treatments really are on that seed and are right there where they're needed at the time they're needed. And that really has led to just excellent performance. If you look at the data, it's really, very compelling. And like Kerry's quoted a study, I think she was looking at a particular website. I would go to Growing Matters, which is a coalition of different folks in the industry a few years back, asked a consultancy company to go out and really survey all of the data they could get their hands on over many years of seed treatment trials. And I think they found, 1,600 different trials across about 20 years, looking at neonicotinoids and the performance on seed treatments. And they saw anywhere from 3.6 to over 70% yield improvement across the 8 major crops in North America. And so, that's just a phenomenal performance. And even at the lowest end of that, if you think in soybeans, it was 3.6%. At commodity prices at that time, that was still a 3-to-1 return on a grower's investment. So really, very, very compelling performance in terms of the data. And then if you just build on that and think about the other benefits, they really help growers plant earlier, which is certainly a trend in many crops. There's a lot of ground to cover, and so planting earlier brings benefits to growers. It also allows for better yields in certain crops, and so seed treatments support that kind of phenomenon. It allows for stronger, more uniform stands, and if you think that through, you can avoid replants in some situations, maybe reduce seeding rates. So again, I think it all comes down to performance, and growers are a pretty good judge. If things don't work, they stop using them. But seed treatment's been quite the opposite. If you look at the adoption of seed treatment across major crops, it's been very, very strong over many years. So yeah, the proof's kind of in the eating, I think, and that's why seed treatments are so important.
Thank you so much, Martin. I think you've hit the nail on the head, especially as we're seeing some other trends in agriculture, especially in soybeans, of early planted soybeans. I think you're right that that performance aspect is imperative. Now, Carrie, of course, I want to ask you about some regulatory questions as well, since regulatory is a specialty of yours. So I know there have been some questions about the seed treatment regulatory process. So would you mind kind of describing what that process looks like to approve a seed treatment?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, much like other pesticides, seed treatment products have to go through a really stringent regulatory review process. So, there's actually sort of three layers to regulation of seed treatment. So, I'll start with kind of the most complex layer first, which is that actual product registration. So, whether you're in Canada or in the US, the regulations are really similar for seed treatment products. It's just like a pesticide that you would apply maybe as a foliar spray or even, a soil applied pesticide. Those products have to go through a thorough evaluation by regulatory authority, by law. So much like those other products that you would use, whether it's a herbicide spray or a fungicide spray, they go through a very thorough scientific review first. So there's a large amount of data that has to be provided to those regulatory authorities about the efficacy of the product, about its safety profile, its fate in the environment, any potential non-target organism or beneficial organism exposure. So think of, human health safety assessments as well as environmental safety assessments. And that's a large volume of information that an agency has to review. So as an example, in the US, that would be the US Environmental Protection Agency is required by law to do those evaluations, and companies that are producing seed treatment products must submit those for that thorough review that takes years to do. So a lot of data that has to be poured through and evaluated by the agency before a product could ever be used in the marketplace as a seed treatment. So that's kind of the first layer, and there's a lot there that we could talk about more in a bit if there's some deeper questions on that part. But sort of then the second layer, it relates to the application of the seed treatment itself. So there's the label requirements that must be followed that EPA has put in place, and then of course the states have to review the products themselves and the labels that go with that. And then the applicators themselves typically have some type of certification process or procedures that they would go through to be able to put the treatment on the seed. And then kind of the third layer of regulation that I mentioned is through the seed acts. So in the US, it would be the Federal Seed Act, and that really mandates certain labeling requirements that talk about what the seed is been treated with, so that's very clear to people. Proper handling techniques are required to allow for that treated seed to be sold into commerce or move from, say, state to state or province to province. So that's kind of a high level view of the multiple layers and the multiple ways in which seed treatments are regulated. It's not a small thing. And it is something that I've heard about as well, sort of maybe a myth out there that seed treatments are not regulated or treated seed is not regulated. And in fact, I'm here to say they are, very much so.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie. And yeah, maybe it's a myth that needs to be dispelled. Martin, another question I kind of want to ask you that is going to help lead into, I think, some of these audience questions that we're getting is, one of the biggest buzzwords right now I'm hearing is sustainability. And I know maybe another myth that comes into question is whether or not seed treatments are a sustainable solution. So I wanted to ask you, are seed treatments a sustainable solution for the ag industry, and why?
So yeah, it's interesting you mentioned sustainability being a buzzword, because it is everywhere, right? I mean, you're seeing that in every discussion we have right now. But I think you have to step back and say, what do we really mean by sustainability? And I guess the definition I'd probably use would be you're going to produce more with less. But that less means maybe less inputs, less environmental impacts, less footprint, more efficiency, and really ensuring that the land can continue to produce for generations to come. That's kind of how I think about it. And to really do that, you've got to look at the whole system, right? And not just one piece of the system. You've got to look at the whole farming operation and say, how do all these pieces fit together? On that basis, I think it's pretty clear to me that seed treatment plays a big role in sustainability. And maybe to kind of give you a picture of that, I'd say let's take a look at neonics again, and the study I mentioned earlier on, which I think was a fantastic, overarching view of neonics in seed treatments. But let's cast a vision of a world where you didn't have neonicotinoid seed treatments. So what would happen? It would be reasonable to say, there'd be more foliar sprays of insecticide. And in that analysis, the suggestion was you'd replace a pound of neonics with about 5 pounds of foliar insecticide chemistries. So if you think about that from an efficiency standpoint, that doesn't sound particularly efficient. You might need more land to produce the same yield, because yields would no doubt go down, as I mentioned earlier. You may see an increase in tillage because you've got to break up that soil to maybe attack some of those pests in different ways. You might see seeding rates go up, replants go up, more trips across the acre to spray rescue sprays to deal with insect pests. You'd take away an important tool that's used in an integrated pest management approach, right? Where you want multiple ways to tackle pest and disease to avoid resistance development. So when you think about all those things, you suddenly say, wow, in the absence of seed treatment, the system would look a whole lot less efficient. You'd be using a lot more to get a result that is probably less. So when you really think that through, I think it's pretty clear. Seed treatments play a big role in sustainability, and it all goes back to that first comment I made, that they're very targeted. They're the right amount in the right place at the right time, and that's why they're so efficient. So again, I think if you look at the whole system, you'd always convince yourself, if you looked at the facts, that they play a big role and are an important part of sustainability in ag.
Thank you so much, Martin. Now, I'd like to start answering some of these audience questions we are getting in. And the first one,
Alex,
yes.
really quick, could I add another point on sustainability? Yes. I think Martin did a fantastic job, but I've had a couple kind of examples pop in my head too, about, kind of those indirect benefits that he was alluding to. If you think about cover crops, for example, that's definitely an increase that we see, a trend in row crop production in the US, but to have more cover crops, there's huge, potential benefits from a sustainability and conservation perspective relative to soil health, but that it's not, without a little bit of risk to the growers as well. So if you think of, say it's a grass-based cover crop to corn, that rotation that a farmer may be in, you have the potential for disease or insect pressure carryover from that cover crop to the cash crop if you don't have the right management techniques or tools in place. And seed treatments could certainly be one of those if you think about, say, Pythium disease potential to carry over from one crop to the next. So having a fungicide that may help combat that potential risk. So it's almost like you're enabling cover crops in a certain indirect way when you think about seed treatments. I think of no-till the same way, but just a couple things that popped in my head I thought was maybe worth adding.
No, thank you so much, Carrie. I am glad that you added your comment to it. Please feel free to add anything else and don't let me cut you off.
Yeah, same thing, Martin.
Perfect.
I'm going to leave you to answer the regulatory questions, Carrie. You should keep those.
Fair enough.
Awesome. Well, so we'll go back to our audience question now. So this question is from Sonia Begeman. I think it will be a fun question for both of you, so I will leave it up to you who would like to try to answer, but it reads, can you compare the atmospheric risk from a pesticide in seed treatment dust off versus maybe that foliar applied pesticide? I know, Martin, you were mentioning that as well. They've both kind of come under fire. So which do you see as being kind of more favorable than the other when it comes to protecting beneficials?
I maybe take a stab at that one, Martin. It does sort of touch on regulatory in a way. So maybe one important clarification point is both of those potential routes of exposure are contemplated as part of the risk assessment process that I mentioned before. When you look at how pesticide products, so whether it's a seed treatment or a foliar, those are all thought about in the EPA or PMRA's review process. So they're looking at what are the potential routes of exposure, how much or how long might that occur for. So it is something that the reviewers, the regulators themselves and their scientists are thinking about, as well as, of course, the seed treatment providers and the foliar chemistry providers. So that's something that we definitely take seriously and have to provide data on and as part of those evaluations. I don't know if I could compare sort of side by side. That would be difficult because not all products are used in the same way. So, how a potential exposure to a fungicide that could potentially dust off in a planting situation versus in a foliar. I don't know that you could do a kind of a side-by-side apples to apples comparison. But what I would say is if you think about just time of year, that's really important. So when you think of beneficial insects, for example, and when they're most active, you would think about that and have maybe potential more concern or potential for a prolonged exposure later in the season from a foliar spray than sort of the planting window with which that occurs. And that certainly should be part of the risk assessment process and is, of course, as the agencies are looking at that. So hopefully that kind of addresses that. I don't know, Martin, if there's anything else you would add to that, but I know there's been a lot of advancements looking at dust off and trying to help ensure we've got, the right coating quality, the polymers in place, dust off reduction, planting equipment changes, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think the only thing I was going to add was, in both cases, there's mitigation, right? And there's things we do to reduce those environmental impacts. So in the case of seed treatments, it's choice of polymer, it's lubricants to help through the planter to reduce dust off. In foliar applications, it can be nozzle selection. So in both types of applications, there's clearly mitigation and things we can do to minimize those exposures, right? In both cases. But I'd probably go with you, Kerry. I think about the time of planting versus when foliar sprays take place. I think I'd probably think intuitively that the seed treatment side would be less because of that in terms of overall potential impact. But again, all of that's contemplated in the risk assessments done by the different regulatory authorities. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much to both of you. And I will tell you, our audience is not pulling questions today. So I am going to move on and ask our next one from Betsy Danielson. Thank you, Betsy, for your question. And she asks, are any ethanol plants, of course, talking about the situation that happened earlier this year in February or March, are any ethanol plants still accepting treated seed for use in ethanol production? And I know neither of your companies directly worked with that, but if y'all had any knowledge to share, we would love to hear it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with what ethanol plants would be accepting right now. I'm not aware of anything that way.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. I mean, we certainly don't supply any seed to any of those ethanol plants. I'm aware of that particular instance. I think Alex, you and I talked about it at one point earlier this year. I think that particular situation was a very unique situation where some things were perhaps being done that shouldn't have been done, and I think there was a lot of work to investigate that. But we weren't involved in that per se as a supplier of any materials to any ethanol plant.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Sorry, we couldn't answer your question very well, Betsy, but we'll do some research into it and see if we can answer it later for you. And then, this is a great question, I think, from, I apologize, I am going to butcher this name, from Marines. Marines ask, biologicals are growing in popularity as seed treatments. Are these as good as chemicals like neonics to protect seeds?
I'll maybe take a first stab at it and Kerry go next. So it's really interesting to me in seed treatments. People talk about biologicals. That's been the buzzword too in ag. But in seed treatments, they're mainstream, in my opinion. Biologicals are used. There's many examples of really successful biologicals in seed treatments. We supply some of them. I know Kerry's company does and others do. And so, they're really effective partners for chemistry. In most cases, they're used alongside the chemistry to complement the performance of the chemistry. So you may have an insecticide and a biological nematicide, for example. We have inoculants with biological fungicides. We have many examples. Typically, what I've seen is it's combination products, partners to chemistry. They work really well alongside those chemistries. I'm not sure I see an immediate time when they replace chemistry, but who knows? Today, I don't think the spectrum of activity or performance is necessarily good enough to always do that for all the different pest challenges we have. But there's no doubt that biologicals are one of the most important and growing areas in seed treatment. And I think if you looked across ag, it would be the largest segment, I think, of use in terms of biological products. So yeah, maybe to answer the question, no, I don't see a day where a neonic disappears and a biological replaces it. I'm not sure I see that, but I see room definitely for both. And partnerships between chemistry and biology to solve different problems. So that's how I'd probably see that. Kerry, I don't know if you have any other thoughts there.
Oh, I think you hit it right on the head, Martin. It's definitely a fast-growing area, and an area I think the entire industry is really excited about, to be honest, too. I think it's kind of a frontier that we're really looking forward to, whether you're a seed company or a provider.
And I wish we could talk all day long about the compatibility and things that pop up with biologicals and the chemistry that can also go on the seed. But we'll have to save that for another rainy day. But another question that we had that's pretty interesting is from Gary Mabon, who asks, grower choice of seed treatment seems to be a growing issue now. So how is the seed and seed treatment industry addressing this? I kind of like to tack on to that with my own question and ask you kind of what is the seed treatment industry doing about education when it comes to seed treatments? I am not sure who to direct this to first, so maybe Kerry, you can start, and Martin, if you have anything to add, I'd love to hear it.
Sure. Yeah, I think maybe just to build on Martin's point about the number of products that are available now, and it almost links to another question I see in the chat about what's one of the more common myths. I think one of the common myths is that there is not a lot of choice for growers, and in fact, we see kind of the opposite of that there's a lot of products entering the marketplace that have different profiles in terms of what they are their efficacy or what they work on, maybe targeted for specific crop types. So there's a lot of choice out there. I think the trick comes with how do you ensure from maybe a seed company perspective that you have the right combination for the majority of the growing conditions that are needed. So when you think of being able to deliver that to a farmer customer at the right time, that's another important consideration. So when are growers making their seed decisions? Well, in the US and probably Canada, they're making them now for those crops that are planted in the springtime. So as those orders are coming in, you have seed companies trying to think about what is the biggest need in terms of being able to provide that more holistic recipe. So for a crop like corn, for example, that's treated, ahead of time and upstream at a larger facility, as opposed to maybe soybeans, as another example, that are treated downstream right at the planting time. So there's different crops have different needs, both for the seed type itself. So coming back to corn, it's an angular seed and not easy to treat, certainly not something that you could treat in large volumes downstream. So that happens, by the seed company. So they're having to sort of understand the grower needs and dynamics in the marketplace months in advance and maybe even years in advance to develop the right treatment recipes, different combinations of products that they can offer for choice, versus something that could be treated, right there in the springtime on the day of planting. So it really varies by crop. But that is one of the more common, maybe misconceptions that are out there about seed treatment offerings, and certainly something that companies are sensitive to because, in the end, we really want people to have choice so they can tailor for what their operation needs. Martin, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I'd have probably gone to a similar place. When I first heard the question, my first thought was, wow, normally I hear there's too many choices in seed treatments and too many things to think about. But I think perhaps where you went is you've got to think about different crops. So maybe in soybeans, yeah, there are a lot of choice because it's treated downstream. Corn's different, as you said. It's commercially treated, so you're not going to have an infinite number of choices because there's a lot of planning and logistics go into that upstream commercial treatment. But I do think, we're not in the corn seed business ourselves, but if you look at a number of our customers and the corn seed players, there's a pretty wide range of options. Fungicide, insecticide, nematicide, biologicals. It's pretty broad. It's just not going to be as broad in some of those other crops that are treated downstream, where you're able to do a lot more tailoring, and different partners who are doing that treating can add their own kind of flavor to things. So I think it does depend on the crop, and some of that is the logistical supply chain nature of how that individual crop is treated versus another. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much to both of you. I have one last question. I know we're about at our time, but I'm going to sneak in one last question. I'll ask you to keep your answers short since we're at our 30-minute mark. But what do you think the future of seed treatment is going to look like? And I'll have Martin start this time since Harry started last time. Short answers and we'll let you go.
Yeah, I think nothing ever stays the same. We've seen chemistries come and go. That happens. I think that's exciting too, right? I think there'll be many more active ingredients come into the seed treatment space in the near future. I really believe it's an area where companies are investing. So I think stay tuned for that. And then I think back to the biologicals topic. I think there's still a lot more opportunity there. You're going to see more biologicals in partnership with chemistry. I don't think that's an area that's done. And then maybe final one, if I can sneak a third one in, formulations. We shouldn't underestimate, formulation technology, different coatings, different polymers, lower use rate on seed, faster drying. All these things are innovation. It's not just about active ingredients, right? So those three things I would say.
Thank you so much, Martin. Carrie?
Yeah, I agree with everything Martin said. The only addition I might put in there is also the application technologies themselves. So kind of that formulation, but also the treater themselves. There's been a lot of really interesting advancements in the past 10 years or so, and I'm excited to see what that can bring. So if you add actives, biologicals, plus formulations, and then the treatment, the treaters themselves, I think it's an exciting time to be involved in seed treatment.
Perfect. Thank you so much to you both. That is actually all the time we had today. But just a reminder, if you missed a portion of this live, we will be putting up a recording on seedworld.com within the next couple of days. And if you like this topic, make sure to tune in next week to hear Sonia Begeman talk about crop protection, their greatest misses, and what the future is going to look like for crop protection. It'll be a great complement to this week's episode. So I am looking forward to seeing all of you next week. Make sure to tune in at the same time, Wednesday at 12 Central, and we'll see you then. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.